Well, welcome back. We're discussing the future of Cuba. Let's get back to our panel. Let's go back to Gloria in San Francisco. And Gloria, here's something that Diaz-Canel has said in the past. He said that, quote, imperialism can never be trusted, not even a tiny bit. Never. It was a reference to the United States. Well, he is now president. Do you think he's going to be more of an ideologue or a pragmatist when it comes to relations with the U.S.?
Well, he was quoting Che Guevara's quote about not trusting imperialism one tiny bit. And that is a very proper and correct assessment and understanding not only of President Diaz-Canel, but the population, in knowing all the blows that they've been visited by Washington. So it's a matter of understanding the nature of the U.S. government, but also always stating that they are willing to have negotiations based on mutual respect and without any preconditions, respecting the sovereignty of Cuba. These are elemental guidelines for the country, as well as many other countries that have tried to have normalized relations with the United States. So it's nothing new. And I think that the issue, again, of U.S.-Cuba relations has much to do with the U.S. economic, political, and diplomatic pressure that's entailed in the U.S. blockade. That's why it's not really correct to call it an embargo. It's not simply a travel ban. It's the U.S. trying to pressure governments and corporations around the world from doing business, from having normal relations with Cuba.
Right.
And I would say this, too, that the American people more and more want to be able to have the freedom to travel to Cuba, want to have normal relations. They do not see Cuba as an enemy. And I think that is a huge factor in why Obama also made some changes. They were limited changes. But this will have an important weight in anything that comes in the future, including if there's any continued aggression by the United States in any way. I think the people will have a say.
Okay, Mark, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think President Diaz-Canel's biggest challenge is not relations with the United States. It's not relations with the Trump administration. It's with regard to domestic reform, economic reform at home. And President Obama, of course, opposed the embargo. I personally oppose the embargo. I think it's a misguided policy that has failed. That said, the key to reviving the Cuban economy is going to be based on the Cuban government taking steps internally. And that's something that Raul Castro himself recognized. And they, in recent years, had taken some important measures. They made it easier for Cuban entrepreneurs to start companies. Now they're regressing somewhat. They need to unify their currencies. Again, that's something Raul Castro recognized. So the embargo can be lifted tomorrow. That's not going to have a huge impact on the Cuban economy if it's difficult for entrepreneurs to start businesses, if it's still challenging for foreign companies to try to engage there. So yes, I think there are things the United States can do to facilitate a better relationship. There are things Cuba can do to facilitate a better relationship. But the biggest challenges are really domestic in nature for the new president. Okay,
let me go back to Alana. Alana, we've been talking here about the new leader, that this is a generational change in Cuba, as we've been hearing. And I was wondering, to what extent, under those circumstances, does he have to prove that he is his own leader? He's not part of that generation that led and fought through the revolution. Let's take a listen to what some Cubans have been saying about their new leader.
What young people in Cuba should do is not fail the revolution or everything they have done for us. These are different times, not like those in which young people had to work a lot to study. They did not have the possibilities that we have today.
Many generations have passed since the revolution. They are people from another time period, another historical context, and society is asking for change.
So, Alana, the fact that he doesn't have those credentials, that the Castros have, they were both part of the revolution and the battles afterwards, does that make his job a little bit more difficult?
Well, I think that is one of his goals. He said today in the speech, President Miguel Diaz-Canel said that he will try to make the government more responsive to the Cuban people. And, how that gets done remains to be seen. But I think it's very clear that the younger generation of Cubans who did not grow up during this era of the revolution really have different expectations. They have higher expectations. They have higher hopes of being listened to. They have higher hopes of having more economic agency and economic freedom and independence from the state. they have more hopes of being able to really chart their own path and their own future. And a lot of that has to do with gaining some independence. And so there is a lot, when we travel to Cuba and when we meet with younger Cubans, there's a lot of, hope and expectation that those changes are made. At the same time, they also, they don't want to get rid of some of the gains of the revolution and their economy right now. They want to still have access to education and other of those social safety nets as well. So I think the real challenge will be how to, answer and respond to these younger Cubans and make them feel like government is more responsive to their needs and hopes and aspirations. A lot of the people that we meet with, some of them and many of them now starting their own small businesses and private entrepreneurs, when we ask them about this new leadership change and a new president that's no longer a Castro at the helm, they recognize that it's very symbolic and that it's very important, but at the same time, they're a bit more removed and they don't anticipate that this is going to be a huge change politically and economically for them, and they're really trying to just figure out, are there going to be reforms, economic reforms that allow me to have my business? Are there going to be economic reforms that unfreeze the licensing structure for self-employed Cubans? And these are the questions they're asking. And so it'll be interesting to see how President Miguel Diaz-Canel will be able to respond to this and make government more responsive to this generation.
Juan, looking at reforms and looking at the young generation, Juan Diaz-Canel, Diaz-Canel, the new president, he says that he supports LGBT rights, for instance. He supports an expanded internet. He supports an open media. We heard that from Michael Voss in his report. Will we see him push those policies very hard?
Yeah, I think that he's coming at this from, he seems to be much more liberal in the sense of to a lot of these social issues. And so it'll be up to him to see if he can follow through on that and really deliver on those promises to the Cuban people.
Juan, what is your view on that? Juan Jacomino, can you hear me?
Well,
go ahead.
I would say, Aaron, I'm sorry I may have missed part of your question. I would say that some of the things are easier said than done. There are no magic solutions to many of the challenges that Cuba has. Not for President Raúl Castro, not for President Miguel Diaz-Canel, and not for whoever the president will ever be. And those circumstances are aggravated by the fact that Cuba is under an economic circle by a very powerful neighbor, in this case, the U.S. That doesn't make things any easier for Cuba. Of course, there are numerous challenges that need to be addressed, but really, it isn't exactly easy in the circumstances of Cuba, a country that, being in the Caribbean, has come up with a society that I would say is, more than anything else, a first world society when it comes to mentality, when it comes to the intellectual capacity of people. But that brings along those needs that people in first world societies have. People want email, people want internet, people want the kind of stuff that sometimes they cannot get in conditions of a third world economy, agricultural economy, based on things like tourism that depend on the weather or whether people visit or not. So it's not exactly easy for anyone, really. And those are things that need to be considered when looking at the situation of Cuba, be it under Diaz-Canel or be it under whoever. And again, I would like to stress the fact that circumstances that are very negative for Cuba continue to exist and that make it very difficult for anyone, regardless of whether that person wants less or more freedom or space or interaction. It's not exactly easy. That's what I would say. But the challenges for Diaz-Canel are many, and I'm sure he will deliver his own imprint on business in Cuba, and we will be seeing that. And as time goes by, I will be proven wrong or right, but I do believe he will give his imprint.
And that's where we are going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. But the conversation continues online. Join us on CGTN America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.